Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Dr. Severance MacLaughlin, CEO and founder of DeLorean AI, James Swanwick, investor, entrepreneur, and human performance strategist, as well as Steven Dickens, CEO and principal analyst of HyperFRAME Research. We're here to discuss how data-driven insights can inform smarter public spending, better policy, and stronger health outcomes across the U.S. It's great to have all of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Dr. MacLaughlin, we are going to try and figure out the U.S. healthcare system in 20 minutes. There's a lot to unpack there.
Absolutely. I think it's a huge opportunity for artificial intelligence and other technologies to be accepted to drive down not only the costs associated with healthcare, but also improving health outcomes. And what we're seeing in our sector right now is a 10 times return on investment for AI in healthcare, but also the extension of life, right? So some technologies are looking at an additional day of life for every week that's being exposed to these AI technologies.
And James, you bring an interesting perspective because you're thinking about prevention as the first step, and there are so many attributes for preventative medicine or taking care of yourself.
Yeah, prevention is 100 times cheaper than cure, and $4.5 trillion strain on the US healthcare system. $250 billion of that, just put it into perspective, is preventable alcohol misuse issues. And so if we can use AI and harness that to increase people using preventative measures versus getting stuck, I would submit, in the US healthcare system, the traditional system, that's going to relieve the US judicial system. It's going to relieve a lot of the financial budgetary constraints on the US healthcare system, and it's going to produce a much healthier society.
Yeah, and if we take both of those concepts together from Dr. MacLaughlin and from James, it's interesting how technology is really at the forefront, whether you're thinking about wearables, prevention, figuring out how to streamline the US healthcare system. There's a lot of opportunity there.
So, Jill, we're still really early into this fourth industrial revolution around AI. We've been talking about it solidly for the last couple of years, but we're still so early. We're re-architecting the entire stack, so that's everything from the way the data's collected, data's presented to these large language models, and then how people interact with them. I think healthcare is one of those sectors that, as I track the overall technology landscape, for me is just one that's fascinating because you can see value delivered all the way through the stack, whether that's preventative, whether that's patient visits. We're at a point where we're only really starting to understand the implications, and there's both positive implications and negative implications as we deal with the most sensitive of personal information. But for me, I just see a raft of opportunity and how that's going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. The interesting thing for me is, can we capture that opportunity at the speed we need to?
There's a great article that was written in January 2025 by Bassmer Venture Capital, where the title of the article was Healthcare Artificial Intelligence, an overnight success that took decades in the making. Mm-hmm. And it showed all the data with all the patents and whatnot and all the technologies that had to happen before 2025 for us to actually access. Like you said, it's taken so long for us to get here.
What does AI and alcohol prevention, what does that look like? Is it an app? Is it a wearable? Tell us about
all of those things, yeah. App, wearable. Also, I think we're going to see a lot of people now self-diagnosing having an alcohol use disorder by simply submitting their blood work into AI, by typing in how many drinks they're having on a particular day or particular week. Because there's a study that came out that 90% of people who visit a doctor and the doctor asks them, how much alcohol do you drink, will lie. Yeah. Well, they'll misrepresent how many units of alcohol they're drinking. However, if you can use an AI tool and then be honest about that, that is going to go a long way to preventing that person from establishing an alcohol use disorder over time, and also give that patient, who's a self-diagnosed patient, the ability to make lifestyle changes to live a healthier life without alcohol compromising it.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here as it relates to data governance, privacy law, cybersecurity, AI, right? And we're still trying to develop those regulatory frameworks.
Yeah, I mean, and we have to, right? But I'd be cautious, right, in the regulatory compliance. I mean, the European Union, no offense to my my British and Australian counterparts on the panel, we're the first to, as a race to the bottom of the barrel, right, to say that we have EU regulations. I think there needs to be more development first. I don't think Congress is hearing from the right voices, right? There's people that do AI and people that talk about AI. I would say that also that a lot of the data privacy laws are already on the books from the Cambridge issues from Facebook, about a decade ago. But, we still have responsibilities as an AI developer and company. We have to check bias, right, to make sure there's no protected class that is affected in a negative way. We do that as a routine step. Companies are putting together AI boards to make sure that things are validated, that they're statistically important when they're being engaged or being rolled out for full optimization. But we do need to take those things seriously, and that we're not having a negative impact on the patients themselves.
Well, you have to think about liability as well,
Yeah.
right? What if your smartwatch says your heart rate is okay, but it's not, and it misses something? Or, we see false positives all the time with AI.
And I will put there, you're absolutely right. And most people will say, well, the physicians are now asking also, like, if we use this AI, like, are we liable for something that's there? It is always up to the licensed professional if they take the AI's suggestion. But on the opposite side, Jill, right? If you start looking at mistakes with the physicians and their diagnoses, it's about they're correct 60% of the time as a single. When you bring a second doctor in, that goes up to 72, and when you get to like a group or like a cancer board or whatnot, right, you're in the 80s. AI is sitting at about 87%. So you got to weigh both of those options as well.
The interesting thing for me, we talk about regulation, looking at it from a technology perspective. If we go back 18 months ago, the regulatory discussion was, we've got to regulate the size of these large language models and the context windows. We're now talking about small language models, and then so if we'd have regulated the size of the model 18 months ago, we'd have been entirely wrong.
Yeah.
So I think this pace of this innovation is happening so fast. We look at MCP and A2A. Won't bore you guys on the technology there, but you look at those standards. Previously, with standards bodies would take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to reach a consensus. We speed run those in 6 months now. Yeah. So just you look at the technology providers trying to get on board with something like MCP or A2A, how agents talk to each other and the protocols they use. We're speed running those, and literally the industry got together and went, A2A, we need to have a protocol for these two agents to talk to each other. That one, let's just pick it, it's Google's, done, we're fixed.
Right.
The speed at which we're moving from a technology point of view is so rapid that I've not seen it. I've been in this sector 30 years, I've not seen this speed of innovation. From a regulatory point of view, trying to keep up with that, regulators don't stand a chance.
Yeah. Well, and then you're thinking about, do we take a sectoral approach? Do we take a broad-based approach? To your point, just picking one specific model, do you open yourself up to vulnerabilities and lack of redundancy? I want to go back to AI and preventative care. I would imagine there's other ways that you can leverage it as well. Does that suggest that you don't have to go for physicals or other types of checkups?
What I'm seeing is that people are taking less doctor's visits and that they are self-diagnosing at home using AI. So I would actually submit that physicians are not going to have as many regulatory problems because there won't be as many physicians, because the trend I'm seeing is simply that people are literally putting in their blood work and their health conditions or what they think them to be, and actually self-diagnosing and coming up with lifestyle choices that will prevent them from actually having to go and visit the physician. Now, we're not going to wipe out physicians entirely. There's always going to be a situation where you have to visit a hospital, you have to visit a doctor. But the frequency with which families will be visiting doctors, leaving their home, traveling to an office, I think is just declining at such a rapid rate.
We talked about it off camera. My mother-in-law, diabetic, she's now wearing a wearable, checking it out on her iPhone and then doing a telepresence appointment with her physician. 5 years ago, everything I just said didn't exist. The speed of innovation. She's been with us the last couple of weeks. I was chatting to her, I said, when was the last time you went to the doctors? Couldn't remember.
Yeah.
So that when it's not, that's ahead of us. I think that's there today.
It's absolutely happening now. I mean, I'm wearing an Oura ring right now, and a lot of people that I know are tracking their sleep, they're tracking their heart rate variability, and they're making amendments in their lifestyles, which is changing their health. Now, even 5 years ago, without the explosion of wearables, you would go to a doctor and a doctor would say, this is how you need to sleep better, this is the lifestyle, these are the lifestyle choices you need to make. That's not happening at nearly the same rate as what it was.
So the interesting thing for me is you're not just layering AI into it, the devices, the wearables, the underlying technology, the apps, the internet, AI is building on that last 20 years of innovation.
Again, respectfully, I agree that being more informed and producing more data is fantastic. I do think the term self-diagnosis, doctors did go to school for 8 years or 14, 15 years, and it's important, right, because we're talking about a population that we have trouble with medical adherence, that there does need to be a licensed professional in the room. And as an AI provider myself, I'm the first one to say that licensed professional's opinion matters. We're providing the data for them to make the best quality decisions at the top of their license. But letting someone make it by themselves, again, if they should eat pasta that night is great, but do I have a systolic or diastolic issue? A medical professional needs to do that.
You can have the AI represent the person using the AI as a licensed medical professional, though, can you not? You can just tell the AI, you are a licensed medical professional. Think of yourself as the world's greatest surgeon and diagnose me because of these conditions.
So that is a futuristic Star Trek point in time. I think we need to be very cautious when we talk about AI in healthcare, in that there always needs to be a licensed professional that has been trained, because that human touch and that ability to have that 1% hallucination is where the human comes in. Now, I'll bring you to an example with large language models, right? Large language models need large language libraries. OpenGPT, ChatGPT, they use the worldwide internet. We have developed large language models, something what you're talking about, for renal and cardio, but they're curated specifically for that medical area versus having hallucinations from the World Wide Web, right? We have seen examples in colleges when they're writing term papers that are around biology or medicine where the AI has caused major hallucinations and factual discrepancies.
I mean, this to me goes back to my point around large language models, small language models. If you're doing a cancer diagnosis, you don't need to know, the large language model doesn't need to know the works of Shakespeare. It's just not relevant for the task that it's being asked to look at. So if you're doing cancer prevention, you want a small language model where you've built the corpus of data that is super specific on cancer. You want it not to have any access to anything else, because that's where other erroneous data comes in. You want a small language model, might only be 3 billion parameters instead of hundreds of billions of parameters like you see in ChatGPT. The ability to bring that together, have a set of data that's private, that's maybe not on the public web, that's sitting in a more regulated environment, that's where we're starting to get to.
I'll give you an example there. When Philips went for their FDA, for the radiology, using computer vision, great. They were the first one, I think, in 2018 or 19 to get approval. Awesome scientific achievement. What they found out after they did that is that the scale of the different radiographs they were using as the controls were different, and they had to go back and do that. So that's an example of a human error that could alter an AI's output.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's move ahead to a different topic here and talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, right? And then, Medicaid, Medicare, and Aging America, certainly we're going to see changes there. How can predictive tech help stretch limited resources?
So, we're looking at right now, so the first thing, unpack this, right, is, the president and Congress is not taking money away from Medicaid. They're decreasing the people that are on the roll, that are healthy and embodied. And that's going to reduce the cost by maybe $7.6 billion, right? And that's less than 1% of the big beautiful bill. But if we actually used AI in prevention and be able to predict something's going to happen, so predict a hospitalization and then prevent it from happening. So our technologies that we have, we've reduced hospitalizations up to 50% within 60 days, right? So that would translate into about $9.6 billion just in the renal component. Now, if we bring cardiovascular, now we're looking at about $20 billion, right? So being able to reduce the cost with the same amount of investment, right? So no one's taking money away from our Medicare and Medicaid enrollees, and then getting them better care so that they're healthier is, I think, the real way that we achieve those budget objectives.
Right. I mean, it all comes down to transparency and accountability at the end of the day. Where is this money going? How are resources being distributed? I mean, I think that's one of the critical issues within the U.S. healthcare system, any healthcare system, to be able to track that and, identify how it's being leveraged.
Well, I think the thing for me is we're making all these projections and there's lots of politics wrapped around those projections. One of the things I keep coming back to is an analogy of within 10 years, the farrier replacing shoes on horses had gone after the introduction of the Model T. We're at that type of foundational change. So making projections over a 10-year cycle when we're at 2 years into the AI revolution, this for me is going to be one of those foundational technologies like the internet, like our mobile phone, that has a chance to re-architect the entire stack. So I think the only thing I would say is if you're hearing a projection from a political sort of source around the pros or cons of any type of bill that talks about over the next 10 years we're going to see this, I think they're going to be wrong. Yeah. Because this is such a foundational technology that's going to be completely re-architect the stack. We talked about the numbers of doctors' visits. We're talking about preventative care. We're talking about the impact from a regulatory perspective. The whole landscape's going to be affected by this technology, and it's going to transform incentives, structures of the industry. Everything's going to be up for change. I think we can look maybe 6, 9, 12 months ahead and be pretty sort of robust in our opinions. If you're looking beyond that, I think everything's up for discussion.
Yeah, I think having access to healthcare education using AI for the standard American person is going to reduce health challenges in the first place, which is going to relieve the healthcare system of all of its budgetary problems. And also, there's always going to be politics, people are going to be arguing over the budgets, but the American consumer, the American person is more present with health education now because of AI than in any time in history. And that is going to show up in policy, that's going to show up in budgets, and that's going to show up, as I said before, in a much healthier society in general.
Well, I think that value-based care by 2030, like most physicians are going to have to be on value-based care, which for your audience is if the physicians do better and get people better, they get paid more, and if they don't, they get penalized. That's going to force the adoption of technologies for them to drive or predict cardiovascular disease, renal disease, and then keep these individuals out of the hospital. And I think to your point about the education, we as taxpayers, right, we're funding this $4.5 trillion healthcare system. We should be asking government, is our tax dollars driving better health outcomes? Are we reducing the number of hospital visits or the heart attacks or diabetes? And I'd say we're not, and I think that's because government is more about a carrot with the insurance companies rather than the stick. And they don't have a stick because they don't know what they don't know. They don't have that data infrastructure.
The whole system is set up for cure, not for...
I agree, I completely agree.
See, and that's part of the challenge too, without understanding the operating framework in terms of how data can be shared and so forth. You can't just go to your Cigna, your UNH, and you want to share data just to see what outcomes look like. You have to figure out what that all looks like. But to your point, when it comes to healthcare education, we've made strides with financial literacy and so forth, and consumers having tools at their fingertips to understand the markets and even digital assets, we can argue, has driven the policy advancement that we've seen there as a result of the retail investor understanding the environment and really being the catalyst behind it, right? So to your point, if there's more adoption behind healthcare AI and tools for the consumer, their voices are pretty loud in terms of getting, policy formulated.
So I think that's really important. As we're talking off screen, it's the providers who are a capitalistic business who are investing in AI more than the health insurance companies. They will say they have AI, but they're trying to do it in-house, which is not their core business. It's the physician groups, primary care groups, nephrology, cardiology groups who are investing in this to get the best results for their patients, but also prepare for that value-based care by 2030. That's a legislative initiative.
All right, we got to leave it at that. Conversation around the insurers forthcoming. Appreciate everyone's insight, and thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.